Congratulations, David, on the book, and thank you very much for joining me on this podcast. And
it's a great pleasure to talk to you.
thank you. And the name of the book, and it's a rather sweeping one, and let me probe you on that first. The Art of Uncertainty, How to Navigate Chance, Ignorance, Risk and Luck. Your acknowledgement section says that you had a bit of a kerfuffle, to quote you, with your publisher as to to decide what the title should be. Tell us more about it.
Oh, we went through every sort of type. There's chance, risk, luck, probability, ignorance, uncertainty. They're all in there. And I thought, how many can I put in? And interesting, we ended up with this list, and how to navigate, how to live with. And one of the issues was that I didn't want to make it sound like a self-help book. And I say a couple of times, but this is not a self-help book for people, how to deal with the anxieties of your life. Although I do talk about that a bit. I've written articles since then. I did one in The Guardian recently which went into the well-being section on living with uncertainty, because I do deal with that a bit. But because I'm a statistician. I'm not a psychologist or a therapist or anything. So I wanted to make it sound sort of faintly scientific. People have questioned on me. I avoided putting probability in there, partly because although I do talk about probability a lot, the book is not just about probability as a way of handling uncertainty. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just seen as another book on probability, which it is, of course, but I think it goes a lot beyond that. And that's why I kind of avoided probability. But the other thing is that, it's in a series, the Pelican series, which I grew up with when I was a student. The Blueback Pelicans were the autodidact books. They're the ones to teach yourself about a serious subject. They're supposed to be didactic. They're supposed to be teaching books rather than the standard popular science books, which I don't read very much. I always say I don't read the sort of books I write.
Right.
I get bored so quickly by popular science books. I think not popular science books, but all those books about about rationality and logic and being sensible and living it. And I think, oh goodness, I get so bored with them because they just go on and on and on. They're always that thick. Of course, this is thick as well, which is a bit embarrassing. But at the end of it, I don't know what I've learned. Whereas this, I've definitely structured it very carefully as a teaching book. Each chapter is, in a sense, self-contained. There's a list of the summary at the end of these are the bullet points. This is what you should have taken away from this. It is a sort of course, in fact, and could be used as a basis for course. Like my Art of Statistics book can be used as a course book. Well, at least as reading material for a course on probability or risk in the real world, not a technical probability book. Yeah. Sorry, I went on a bit.
Not at all. And let's pick one of these aspects, the first one being uncertainty. I loved the way you start with your own example, that many things have had to fall in place for us to be born, alive, and even talking today as we speak. Tell us about your grandfather and the eventful life that he had. How did that come about?
Writing that first chapter has had a profound influence on me. It has changed my attitude to my existence. It really has. It's quite extraordinary because I just wanted to tell a story about, maybe luck or chance in a life. And I chose my grandfather who, had the bad luck to be born just in time to join the First World War, and he had the terrible luck of having an awful job in 1918 as brigade gas officer in the Ypres salient after the Battle of Passchendaele, which is just about the worst place you could ever be. His job, he used to be spending the whole time walking around. A lot of it would have been on roads that had been, or trenches that had been targeted by German artillery. He had his life expectancy was minimal, and of course he got shelled, he got blown up, but he had the great luck of surviving and being put in as B2, declared B2, not fit for frontline duty anymore. So he survived the First World War by this fantastic bit of luck, and which, of course, if he hadn't, I wouldn't be here writing it. And then once you start thinking about it, you think, well, there's so many other ways in which I could not exist. Right through all your ancestors, the slightest change in behaviour and you wouldn't be here. And then you get to your parents, and it's very difficult to think about about your own conception, because you have to think about your parents having sex. And, it's not just teenagers who go at the thought of their parents having sex. I'm 71 and I found it really difficult to think about. My parents died years ago. And I thought, come on, get a grip, man. You can actually think about this now. Grow up. So I researched the weather in the time and place where I was conceived, and it was a really bad cold snap, and they were living in a pretty well unheated stone cottage. So what do? How do you keep warm? So, and here I am. But I so easily might not have been, because just so many, the fact that I'm here is so unbelievably unlikely. It's from a long series of micro contingencies. I don't believe it's sensible to talk about the probability that I'm here, because you'd have to think of the counterfactual that I wasn't here, in which case we wouldn't be asking the question. So I don't think that makes sense. But I think one can say that, each of us is only here because of a staggeringly chance, whatever we could mean by that, which is what I go into in the book, a set of circumstances. And I think that's very humbling,
Right.
to think that we really shouldn't, none of us should be.
Yeah, and it just puts the whole thing in perspective, doesn't it? Because
And asking, what's the purpose? Why am I on Earth? And everything. It's as ridiculous as asking, why did these lottery balls come out with these numbers? Well, they just did, and they might so easily not have, but they did. And asking why is completely nonsensical. And similarly, I think asking why am I here? What is the purpose of my existence? Well, it's completely nonsensical. It makes no sense whatsoever. So it's changed my attitude to life completely.
and that happened recently, you say, when you started writing.
Yeah, when I was writing the book, I'd never really grasped the staggering, and of course it's obvious when you think about it, how easily and it's not like I would have been someone else. I just wouldn't be here if, just, to put it, actually biologically, if a different sperm had made that little journey.
Right.
There could have been, nobody, or a girl, or, anything. It's just certainly not me. So I do find that it shows the fragility of our existence, the absurdity, and one could get all philosophical about this, but I don't think I need to, because what it for me, just reinforces is the role of essentially unattributable chance in all our lives.
And it's so difficult to measure these things, right? The unit of measure for weight, let's say, is kilograms or pounds. How do you measure uncertainty? The long ago, I remember I was in down south in Thiruvananthapuram, where I had to talk to patients who were in pain for one project that I was doing. And on the questionnaire that was given to me, it said, please rank your pain on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being nothing at all. And, it was unbelievable, because it's very relative. And I wonder if that's what it is with uncertainty then.
Well, the pain was funny, because I've had that when I went to hospital when I had some surgery, and it went wrong, and I got this horrible infection. I was in absolute. So they say, what's the scale of pain on 1 to 10? So I said 11, and then going, it's 11. And then, of course, burst out laughing, which made it even more painful. And then,
oh, dear.
So, no, in those circumstances, not. And I think that, but I think, it's something I talk about in the book, is that if we're talking about, in a sense, uncertainty about a well-defined concept, not uncertainty about whether there's a God or not, or uncertainty about what's the best Beatles song, as I mentioned, or something like that, but about uncertainty about a really clearly defined, verifiable statement, like something will happen, I don't know, President Trump will get a third term, or something, some absolutely verifiable statement, then we can use probability. And I emphasise in the book a lot about that the probabilities are personal. They're personal expressions of our belief. And the crucial thing about a probability, it's a number, and you can't directly measure it. It's an odd number, because it's not like weight or time or distance. There's no probabilityometer. We can't pull out our measurement device and produce a probability. It's always a judgment. There's always an assessment that we make. But we can tell how good it is. And I talk in the book a lot about this idea of scoring rules, where if we give a probability of 0.7 that it's going to rain tomorrow or something, and then it does rain, well, that's quite good. And if it doesn't rain, it's not so good. You've said if it's 0.9 and it rains, well, that's even better. And if it doesn't rain, well, that's really worse. So now how should we scale how good those numbers are? Well, you use the square of the error. You don't have to, but the easiest way is just use the square of the error. So, if you say 0.9 probability and it rains, well, your error is 0.1, so you score 0.1 squared, 0.01. And if it doesn't rain, the error is 0.9, and you score 0.81. So 81 times the loss for getting it wrong rather than getting it right. So you realise in those circumstances you want to be really careful about how you assess your numbers. And that's the right sort of, it was developed in weather forecasting, that rule, 1951, and I used it a lot in the book, and both for football results and questions about science and testing, quizzes and things like that. I think it's immensely powerful because it shows you can, unlike the pain thing, we can find out. It's as if we could find out how much pain there was on a scale of 1 to 10, which we can't. We can't do that. In probability, we can. We can't say that 0.7 is correct. Well, we can say how close it was to the right answer. Now, for a single answer, that's not much. But when you do this lots of times, you can really tell how that some people are a lot better than others. And that's the basis for the whole idea of super forecasting competitions, and that some people are just better at this than others. And they have to learn to be humble, to not to be too confident, and so on. So probability assessment, I think, is a fascinating thing, which is greatly underestimated in our lives, and how important it is in business, in politics, in everything. We should be training kids to be probability assessors in school, I think, for all the time. So you should never ask someone what's going to happen. You should say, what's your probability of what's going to happen? So everyone is saying, when you're saying, who's going to win this football match? You don't say, I think, Manchester United will win. No, you have to say 0.9 or 0.8 and so on. And we should be training people to do this right from an early age.
Since you mentioned Manchester United, Sir David, and there are a couple of examples in your book that you seem to be a cricket nut as well as a football fan.
No, I couldn't care less about sport. No, I do talk about Duckworth Lewis.
Oh, you do, yes.
Yeah, because I knew Frank Duckworth, and I think it's a fascinating, Duckworth Lewis is a fascinating bit of mathematics in practice for completing a game that's been stopped, which is one of the things that the birth of probability in the 1600s was concerned with, that issue. So that's why I used Duckworth Lewis.
And you said 1600s. You also make a mention in your book that people have been gambling away using prehistoric versions of the dice. And there you go.
There you go.
And for those who are listening, Sir David is showing me a knuckle bone. Is that
knuckle
right?
bone, astragalus.
Yeah.
It's one I dug out of a lamb's, the heel of a lamb, and we've got these talus bones, it provides a sort of joint, the flexibility in the joint, and that's what people used to throw, these bones, and they're uneven. And there's 4 different ways they can land. And I threw this 200 times, then I got bored. But, to count what the chances were roughly of each of these events happening. Yeah.
How did the butcher react to you when you asked him for a specific part of the...
Yes, because usually when you buy a leg of lamb, they just give you the leg. But I said, I want the leg and I want the foot as well.
Yeah.
I want the ankle as well. You say, yeah, all right, I can do that. But you have to find a special... You can't just go to your supermarket and ask for that. You have to actually have a real butcher. And then you got it. So I took this home and, as I said in the book, did a very messy amateur dissection to get this bone out. That's what I was interested in. Yeah.
And did it surprise you that while folks were gambling with these contraptions, quote unquote, the probability as a subject was born much, much later?
It was extraordinary. It's one of the big mysteries in development, I think, of scientific ideas, is that people had been throwing knucklebones and dice for centuries, millennia. And nobody had actually treated it as an empirical process and actually counted the number of times things came up. Or thought for symmetric things like dice that you can actually work out the chances of things. The whole idea of probability just didn't It wasn't there at all. It had to be invented. And I think that's the crucial thing. It happened in the 1650s, really, but with Pascal and Fermat and things, others developing that. And then everybody was doing it in 50 years. The whole thing had been done pretty well. So it was an extraordinary time. It just needed this revolutionary idea. And I think that reinforces what I argue in the book, is that probability is an invention. It doesn't exist out there. We had to invent the idea of it. Because it's not there. We can't measure it. We can't see it. But by treating it as if it is there, it's become an immensely powerful tool for handling all sorts of things. So for me, it all fits together, the fact that it was so late, incredibly late, in coming into our way of thinking.
And important decisions by students or by political leaders that can move mountains are made using probability. And what I also like is that in itself, it may not be a lot, but when considered as a group, for example, you illustrate this with, was Osama in the compound at Abbottabad?
Abbottabad.
And where Obama had to take a decision, and it was based on probabilities, but not one single. So he didn't go and say, okay, give me one number and I'll take a call. Tell us about it.
Oh, I think that's such a good story, because it illustrates many important points. That it was suspected that Osama Bin Laden was in the compound in Abbottabad, and they deliberately had multiple independent teams look at the evidence, including, it looks like, I'm not sure if it was called that at the time, a red team. And red teams are people who look for the problems. They're the miserable ones, the ones you don't want to have around most of the time, because they're always saying, oh, this could go wrong, I don't believe this. The skeptics are in there. And the red team sort of said, I think there's only a 30% chance he's there, which is pretty low. But there were enthusiasts who thought, yeah, it's 80% chance he's there. Now, there's been whole academic papers written about whether these different teams should have got together and then given the decision maker, who was President Obama, one number, and they didn't. And I think they were quite right. He got all these different answers. And he's done a lovely interview by this, which was on Channel 4, where he said, well, I was just left with, these weren't so much expressing probabilities as uncertainty. And I think that's really got a lot of insight, because it's showing that you can't trust these single probabilities. That what they're showing is that there's huge amounts of disagreement. There's different perspectives on this. And he said, in the end, I thought it's 50-50. And in the book, I say, I hope by that he wasn't saying, oh, well, he's either there or he isn't, therefore it's 50-50, which would be really idiotic, I think. I hope he was saying, well, actually, they were arguments on both sides. On average, it was about 50-50. And he went for it. He took the call and he went in and he was right. But it was close. He obviously did think it was an extremely close call. So I thought this was a fantastic example of the appropriate use of Now, none of these probabilities were calculated. None of them were the basis of mathematical modelling. They were all judgments.
Right.
And I think that's completely fair. And those lessons have been learnt. And as I say, in the UK, this is a mug from the British Intelligence Services, which I got when I gave a talk at MI5. And it tells you officially that if you say something is likely, it means between 55 and 75% probability. So now the British Intelligence Services are encouraged to put their uncertainty into numbers. They can use words, but if they do use those words, they've got to obey this scale. And so, which I think is a huge progress and very sensible thing. So you can use words. You can say, if an intelligence analyst says, I think this is highly unlikely to be true, then he's got to mean between 10 and 20% probability. If he says it's highly likely, he's got to mean between 80 and 90%. Right. That's what he means. So I think this is a real big advance in the use of probability in serious decision making.
And the language is so important, isn't
it?
You write about the Bay of Pigs disaster in Cuba, where I think you say that Brigadier General David Gray, he wrote a letter to JFK saying that there is a fair chance, quote, that this will go well.
It would succeed. So Kennedy found out about the CIA plot to invade the Bay of Pigs with 1,500 Cuban exiles when he became president. He didn't know anything about it. Then he found out, so he got the Joint Chiefs of Staff to investigate this and to see what they thought about it, and they thought it was a pretty bad idea, and sort of thought maybe 1 in 3, maybe 70% chance of failure, 30% chance of success. And that's what they thought in their judgment. Like madly, that number, which they did think of it, got translated into a fair chance of success. Now, of course, this won't be the only reason the invasion went ahead, why Kennedy agreed with it, but it can't have, there may have been a chance there to stop it. It was a total disaster, total fiasco, and huge regrets by the person who wrote the report and others that why didn't we just say this is a bad idea? And so that to me again illustrates the real dangers of just using language to express uncertainty, because words mean different things to different people.
Yeah,
And
you said a fair chance. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Sir David, but you said a fair chance is in that case equal to not good.
Yeah,
Which is
they
at
meant
odds to each other.
Yeah, they meant not very good. Well, why did they use the word fair? Why didn't they say not very good? So this is a massive mistake, and just a choice of words can be change the whole tone of the argument. And so there's this lovely quote in the book that I used. It says somebody later said, "Why didn't someone just say, look, this has got a very low chance of succeeding." I think by then that, and somebody else this was talking thought there's only about 1 in 10. So why didn't someone just say that? So there's two lessons from that, I think. First of all, the advantage of using numbers rather than words, and second, the advantage of having a diversity of inputs from people. So, I mean, I'm not a business, advisor or anything like that, but actually, when I talk about this, I get a lot of interest from business people because they're constantly getting advice and so on, and doing scenario planning for future things. And of course, there is this enormous danger of groupthink, that everybody starts thinking the same way, tend to be very optimistic, and there's not a diversity of opinions that are being sought. That's what Obama got right by having all these multiple teams, including red teams. And now, for example, again, the Ministry of Defence in the UK are the enormous proponents of red teams. They produce red team handbook on how to organise one, or develop a red team mindset, which is in a way trying to be a self-critical mindset. What could go wrong? Trying to imagine all the problems that could occur. So to avoid a groupthink, optimism bias, and all those things that we know can lead things to go so wrong.
And to be fair, JFK is supposed to have learned from his mistake, because when it came to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was lucky enough to have a chat with Alex Edmonds, your peer, who's written a book on lies and statistics, where he said that he encouraged diversity of opinions in the team, and then they didn't go for it, and the Third World War was averted. And it's less to do with having blacks and whites or gendered people in the room, but more about diversity of opinions, which is very important. No, exactly. That's again comes in the idea of the characteristics that have been shown very good for people who are super forecasters, who are good at judging what is an appropriate uncertainty for the future. They are people who are not stuck with one worldview. They try to be a one-person red team. In one person, incorporate. They're open to multiple diverse opinions. They listen to lots of people. They don't work in a bubble. They deliberately seek out views that could contradict their own. And this is known as fox-like behaviour, which I think is a nice thing. Whereas a hedgehog is someone who stuck in one particular worldview that they find themselves very difficult to shift from. And those people are disastrous as advisors or as predictors. So I think, although, as I said, this is not a self-help book, it's certainly not a management handbook, just through thinking about deconstructing the ideas of uncertainty, I think one's led to what I think is actually reasonable advice for people making difficult decisions. Tell us more about the fox and the hedgehog allegory, because I loved that bit. It is one of those examples where you make a complex subject very palatable for those who have no background in statistics. Oh, well, it's completely stolen from other people. Osama Bin Laden wrote this book comparing these two mindsets, and it comes from an old Greek saying, the hedgehog knows one thing, but the fox knows many things. And it's the idea of comparing someone who's got a worldview in which they try to put everything they see into that worldview. And it's often there's an ism, they're Marxists or they're free market people. They've got one view of how the world should work,
and everything is crammed into that. Whereas foxes have zero ideology. They are completely adaptable to circumstances. They're extremely agile. They'll change their mind in response to new evidence. They are driven by evidence. They're ruthless about. So in a sense, they almost don't care what happens. It's not that they want anything to happen. You've got to separate yourself out from what you want to happen. You have to think very cold. It's like really good gamblers are foxes. Is that really good gamblers don't care who wins a football match. They don't support any teams. They don't. All they care about is what are good odds, and whether they can. And the way that most gamblers make money in football is to bet against the home team. You know, the fact that people are betting on who they want to win, rather than who might win. So that's always the way to make money, is to bet against the one that the people around you want to win.
And to quote from your book, you say that the foxes are cautious in their forecasts and are prepared to adjust their ideas when confronted with new evidence, which is pretty cool. And I think, that's why you say he's a foxy captain, a cricket captain or a football. You know, he knows how to, or I'm just assuming it's got something to do with cunningness.
It's cunningness, and it's the ability to change tactics in response. You know, something. You know, I'm sure. As I don't follow sport, but it's someone who, on seeing that how the conditions are, or you know how the other team are playing, will adapt their tactics, will adapt what they're doing very quickly indeed, and not be stuck. Oh, this is the way we usually do things.
And on that count, you also talk about what are some of the good characteristics of a good forecaster or somebody who plays in this world of probability. And I like the bit about, you know, how the person is expected to use multiple sources of information and also not go with their own confirmation bias that, okay, this is what I feel and I'll only look at numbers that will support my opinion. But the third most important bit, which I found, was humility. You spoke a bit about it. Would it be being a good forecaster and being a decent human being? And I'm not getting philosophical here. There's a lot of, you know, commonality in
I think there is. I think that's why I think actually, you know, thinking about these things encourages one into a certain attitude of mind. As I mentioned right from the beginning, it's very, very humbling. Very humbling, both, you know, the fragility of our own existence, but also the fact how easily we can be wrong. And, you know, it's all to do with being wrong, about not knowing, about ignorance. Uncertainty is the conscious awareness of ignorance, so we have to face up to our ignorance. The word humility appears in the book so often, and rationality hardly appears at all, because, you know, almost nothing on rationality. It's not something that I put forward as something to aspire to. Humility, though, is something I put forward again and again as an important feature in all of this. So I think, for me, these are good lessons to learn.
And one of them also was that sometimes one thing is to look at the data and make your judgment, but oftentimes you need to have physical interactions to get the right number. You write about face-to-face interviews that you did with doctors to figure out possible benefits from new treatment.
New treatments in cancer. Yeah, we used to do that a lot. And because it's actually, you know, before when you're doing an experiment, in order to design the experiment and so on, you know, in order to evaluate a new drug treatment, you have to have some idea in advance of what the benefits might be. Otherwise, you don't know how big to run the trial should be or how to design it. And so it's become now increasingly standard in the pharmaceutical industry that people do interviews of people who do know about the new treatments. How big do they think the benefit will be? And people often say, oh, I don't know. And of course you do know. You know it's not going to save everyone's life, and you know it's not going to kill everybody. So come on, somewhere in between that, how big do you think the benefit might be of this new treatment? There's always a lot of there's quite a lot of optimism bias you've got to try to overcome. We used to do these interviews. They were more like interrogations. We used to sit people down, one on each side, and we wouldn't let them get up until they gave us an opinion, because they didn't want to give their opinion. And you always get some people who are a bit optimistic. That's a standard characteristic. But we used to try to argue them. Do you think it's impossible that it could, you know, you're certain it's going to be beneficial, this new treatment for cancer? You really think you're absolutely certain? Well, maybe not. Okay, well, let's explore. So we used to drag their distribution out and make it wider. But we would extract a distribution from it, and then we'd put these all together and come up with a composite distribution. And generally they were a bit optimistic on the whole, but sometimes they weren't. And I quote this example in the book where, we did one for a new treatment in, was it head and neck cancer? I can't remember now. Anyway, and it actually, it was an enormously effective. And they said, I can't remember the numbers now, but they said something like, we think there'll be a 24% reduction in risk.
Yeah.
24%. And 12 years later, the results came out and there was a 24% reduction in risk. And we'd interviewed them, or we'd seen the thing all the way through, from the interviews right through the published results, and they'd been dead on. Now, that is quite rare, but it showed that they had some humility. They didn't think this was going to change everything, but they thought it was going to be an important difference, not absolutely staggering, but 24% improvement in risk is a good improvement. So they were. And I think it's partly because of the effort we put into interviewing them. We just would not let them get away with being optimistic. But there are techniques to do this now. And once, of course, people get used to doing it, they become more fox-like. They're not just going to be hedgehogs who think, this is bound to work, great new treatment. No, come on, be realistic. There's been so many failures in the past. And so you have to encourage that humility. And you can do it. And so the point is, I know now people working in drug companies, particularly GlaxoSmithKline in the UK, who this is absolutely now integral part of the drug development program. And they're writing about it. Other people are doing it, but they are actually publishing that they're doing this as part of the drug development program, doing these interviews to try to work out might be a reasonable expectation for what's going to happen.
I'm assuming this was. Have you watched the movie 12 Angry Men?
Yes.
Back in the day. So the kind of questioning that, was it Fonda, Jane or Jane Fonda?
Henry Fonda,
Henry Fonda,
her dad.
Just to every one of them, her dad, sorry, yes, and he gets them to change their view. I'm assuming something similar might have happened when you sat with the doctors.
It wasn't quite that bad, but we just, we had to grill them, and we had to feed back and say, sorry, you're being, this is just too optimistic here. I don't really find this implausible.
But which only shows that merely filling a questionnaire will not help you get to an outcome, and you really have to engage.
People have developed some interactive software that feeds things back and say, do you really mean this? And there's no single way to ask. You want some feedback. So, well, according to what you said, you believe this. And so you get people to change their minds. It's easier to do in a personal interview, just drawing something on a piece of paper, perhaps. But you can also try to do it on a form. It's not as effective. A personal interview is better because you can interrogate people.
Do you think artificial intelligence might make this simpler, where it now, with GPTs of the world coming in, it might act like the human and maybe do a better job than them? Or is
I wonder. That's an interesting thought. I mean, it might be a one way to do it, but you'd in a way you'd have to train the system to almost be aggressively questioning of the human instead of the other way around. You'd be being interrogated by this, and it would, it would have to be. You need to be a bit aggressive. You need to say, "No, come on, I don't believe this. Come on, I really."
Yes, and you talked about how 24%, 12 years later, what you discovered in the research was actually what happened, and you might it can't be a coincidence, but the odds of that happening might have been low, but it only showed that it can happen if you do it right, and
it can.
Yeah,
it can, and we got a set of examples where often they were a bit optimistic. They weren't hopeless. You couldn't say they were wrong.
Yeah.
But they tended to be on the optimistic side on the whole.
Right.
But not ridiculously so. It wasn't like they were totally deluded because they expressed so much uncertainty about it. Because I said 24%, but actually the interval around that was really big. They thought there was about a 1 in 6 chance it would be harmful. So, huge spread. Otherwise, of course, it wouldn't have been ethical to even do the trial. If they didn't have some doubt about its benefit, you shouldn't be randomizing patients. So you have to have, in order to have that sort of, to be in a sound ethical position, you have to be uncertain.
Right.
But you wouldn't do the trial unless you kind of expected that there might be some benefit.
And where does this phrase that we hear often, what are the odds of that happening, which is a coincidence, where does that fit into the whole thing? You have a chapter on it, and which is
I like it. Coincidence. I quite like. People ask me that. What's the chances of that happening? Well, no. Most of the time, you can't put a number on it. It's too complicated.
Yeah.
You know, what's the chance of some? But sometimes you can, yeah. Oh, I know. I was actually giving a talk in Bangalore recently, just before in December, and I was talking about this and talking about coincidences, and a woman in the audience said, "Oh yes, well I got a nice one. 4-digit number on a number plate of her motorbike, whatever, was matched the PIN number on her father's credit card, on a credit card." Yeah. And so he said, "Oh well, that was quite nice." And somebody else put their hand up and said, "I've got the same," which was quite remarkable because, a 4-digit number, the chance of a match to that is about 1 in 10,000. But of course, there's so many different pairs of numbers you could match. I had about, more than 100 in the audience, I'd say, 120 in the audience. But even so, I was a bit lucky. But even so, it was very impressive just to show that if you've got enough opportunities, these things will happen. And sometimes you can calculate the odds like that. And like matching birthdays, you can calculate the odds. And that's why you can do all these tricks where you only need 23 people for there to be a 50-50 chance of 2 of them having the same birthday. The one I like is using the last 2 digits of people's mobile phone numbers. And you only need 20 people for there to be, and you ask 20 people, their last 2, and you'll get a match. Out of that, 87% of the time, 20 people, 2 of them will have the same last 2 digits of the phone number, which people find quite surprising. And so you can do this again and again. Sometimes it doesn't work, but usually, so I just pick 20 people in the audience. What's the last 2 digits of your phone number? Blah, 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 and 2 of them have got the same. And 87% chance of that happening. So people find this quite surprising. In the book, I do the maths of how you can do this stuff in your head, in fact, work out those chances.
And you say that law of truly large numbers, if there are too many of them, you will end up getting some of these coincidences. If you can explain that bit.
I suppose that is the point, is that, if there's enough opportunities for something to happen, it will happen. I mean, winning the lottery, the Euro Millions lottery, 1 in 170 million chance of winning. People win. Just because people buying enough tickets, there's a microscopic chance. I worked out and I didn't put this in the book, I should have. The English lottery at the moment, I think, is a 1 in 60 something million chances. Turns out that if you've got a bath and you fill it full of rice, it's about 60 million grains of rice you can fit in I didn't try it, but I have I've looked at the volume taken up by, a kilogram of rice, counted the rice. So the chance of winning the UK lottery is if you have an entire bath full of rice, and one of them was a magic grain of rice, golden grain, and you put your hand in and picked out 1 grain of rice, that's the chance of winning the UK lottery.
Wow.
But people win it.
Yes. Right.
Because enough people buy tickets. So you've got to, the chance of you winning is so microscopic, pulling out that particular grain. I did a thing for a TV program once where we did this, but I'd got a golden grain of rice stuck to my finger with glue. So I put my hand in the bath and pulled out the rice, and there was the golden grain of rice.
Oh boy, there would have been a few jealous people out there.
Yeah, I know. We did own up that it was a cheat. Yeah.
How would you, let me give you a coincidence from my side. I have had an arranged marriage.
Yep.
And so we were in the house just about when we got engaged. My wife's parents and my parents were in the house, and my uncle was there, and they got talking, and my mom and my father-in-law were from the same school in Sangli, which is a remote part of Maharashtra.
Yeah.
And then we started calculating which batch. And they said so-and-so batch. And they were part of the same school. It just so happened that they hadn't been in touch. So they were classmates in a particular batch. That is wonderful.
Yeah. No, it's unlikely, but you're marrying within a certain a certain class of people, a certain group of people. There's, it's like going on holiday and meeting someone you know, because the people you know all go to the same places on holiday. So, I mean, it's a great story. I love it. I bet it's not unique, though. I bet it's not unique.
Yes, possibly not. And you also talk about the importance of looking at data. Sometimes, people... you give the example of Dr. Harold Shipman, the British family doctor who was a serial murderer. Some 215 of his patients died in a 20-year period. And I'm holding up your first book, The Art of Statistics, Learning from Data, where you give that example. Tell us about it. What went wrong there? What could have been sorted sooner? What exactly happened? Because you've done a pretty detailed, user-friendly chapter on it.
Yes, yeah, I have, because he was a general practitioner who murdered his patients over 20, as you said, hundreds of them. And finally he was caught because he forged a will, and then they exhumed 15 of his patients and found they'd all got incredibly high levels of diamorphine, essentially heroin, in their blood. But there'd be no post-mortems, because he tended to murder older people who were a bit ill anyway, because he was visiting them. And so there's this huge public inquiry where the group of statisticians, did a lot of work on the data. Some had done some fantastic work collecting the data on not only all his victims, but other patients being treated that he treated, and other patients that other doctors were looking after as well. And from that, one could look at, over the years, how many more deaths did he have than would have been expected, given the sort of the age and of his patients, and similar to the death rates of the local community. And you could just see, when you plotted the graph, that his excess deaths, the number of extra deaths, just kept creeping up and creeping up and creeping up. But nobody was monitoring this. And even if they had been, you sort of think, well, when do you blow the whistle? When do you say, well, hang on, because there's always going to be people, dying more than those. So when do you blow the whistle? So this is a statistical issue to do with, and you can adapt techniques that were used in industrial quality control to suggest how to set sort of limits, thresholds, where once you go above that, you say, well, hang on, this is odd. This is not. This is beyond just chance. This is something really strange. And we worked out that if someone had been doing this, they could have caught him after he'd only murdered about 40 people. Still a huge number, but he wouldn't have carried on and murdered another 200. What for me it shows is the absolute power of statistics, used completely coldly, without any knowledge of what's going on,
Right.
to suggest something's wrong. It doesn't say what's wrong. It just says, a human should look at this. This is odd. Because when my colleagues applied these methods to 1,000 GPs, they found 6 who were worse than Shipman, who would have signalled before Shipman. And the point is that, why? Because these were lovely, caring, very good GPs who were looking after their patients at home. They were working in retirement communities, and so they were signing a lot of death certificates, because they were enabling their patients to die at home rather than in hospital. So they were really good GPs, but they were signing a lot of death certificates. So it would have been disastrous to investigate these people, or to think they were somehow criminals or murderers. So what that shows is that statistics can just, say someone should look at this. It's correlation, not causation. Right. You have to have a human to say, well, why is this happening? And these things come up all the time in medicine when there's a string of deaths somewhere, and people say, why didn't anyone detect this earlier? Well, we really need these monitoring systems in place to do that. So I do cover that quite a lot in the art of statistics, yeah.
There was a time when Jurgen Klopp, the former manager of Liverpool, the English Premier League coach, when he was signed in for Liverpool, there were data wonks who looked at his figures from his previous club, and they told him that, hey, you know what, you were unlucky not to win in your previous club. Yeah. And then he asked them, hey, did you watch the matches? They said, no, we looked at the numbers. And they wanted to illustrate that how he created chances of expected goals. It's a different story that his strikers didn't convert them, but that didn't make him a bad manager, and they picked him anyway.
Yeah, that's really good. It's really good, because I know when I talk about that in the book, because I've got to look at a really simple football forecasting system that predicts the number of distribution over the number of goals that might be scored in a game, and so gives a probability of a win or draw or lose, and I apply it to Premier League results. And I say that when I did this, and it was reported on the BBC and everything, I did really well, better than the BBC pundit. But I knew I'd been lucky, because I had more wins than I honestly expected to have. I could work, because I'd worked out the probability of each match winning. I knew how many I expected to get right, and I got more right than I expected. So I knew I'd been lucky. And similarly, I might have known I'd been unlucky, because I would have expected this. And if I hadn't, well, I was unlucky in that the matches didn't quite go, the way these particular matches didn't go the way that you would have expected, given all their past performance and so on. So the point about, once you've got a probability model based on past performance, you can actually calculate how lucky or unlucky you are. In other words, are things happening better or worse than you would have expected given a reasonable assessment of uncertainty. And it's an immensely powerful tool. In the book, I show that, 40% of the Premier League results are luck. And, of the spread of points at the end of the season, it's about 40% of luck. And that's actually quite a good, because I can work out what spread I would have expected had the games just be done by chance. The spread is bigger, the top teams score more, the lowest teams score fewer than you would have expected just by chance alone. And so you can say how much of the spread is due to luck. And what's interesting is that I do it, there's a whole of European matches, and you can tell where there's not much luck, when there's a really big spread, is things like the Scottish Premier League with a couple of really good teams which dominate it, and so you get this. The spread is bigger. There's not so much luck in the final rankings, in the final spread. But other teams, especially Germany, have very equal teams in their leagues where the spread of points is not that much bigger than you'd expect just by chance. And sometimes, I didn't have one, I looked at last year's football results, but I remember it stuff with the Scottish second division where at the end of the season, it was complete luck who was top and who was bottom. All the teams are essentially the same. There's no evidence that the teams are actually substantially different from each other. But the Premier League's right in the middle, and I think it's a Goldilocks zone. And I think it's one of the reasons for the success of the Premier League and its international popularity is that the games are not too. There isn't such a difference in the teams that the games are predictable, but it still ends up with some clear winners and some clear losers. So there's this Goldilocks zone in football on the amount of luck in the game that makes it not too predictable and exciting enough.
And to illustrate your point, Sir David, this year's Premier League, Manchester City, which had won, I think, 5 so far or 6 under Pep Guardiola, is struggling. And there is a team called Nottingham Forest, which would languish in the last 3, is now, I think, in the top 4.
Really? I don't follow that. But Nottingham Forest, goodness me, I thought they haven't seen them for a while.
Yes. Last couple of questions, and before we wind this up, is what do you think were the odds of when you were growing up and playing snooker, is what I heard in one of your other podcasts. You enjoyed playing the game. And if somebody asked you that there will be a day when you will be knighted by... How would you have reacted to that?
I'd say completely impossible. Really, I'd have given that... If somebody had suggested that when I was a student playing snooker, drinking beer in pubs, and someone said, I'm going to end up Sir David Spiegelhalter, I'd say, don't be daft. Completely ridiculous. So when I got the letter, because you get a letter,
so tell us, how does it work? Tell me everything. Yeah.
I didn't know my name had been put in. I knew absolutely zero about it. Suddenly a letter arrives. You open it up saying, we would like to award you a knighthood. Do you agree? And I just thought it was a joke. I thought, someone's playing a joke on me, a scam. This is just a scam. I was holding it up and I thought, hang on, this is really well done. This is really good quality paper. And I didn't believe it. And I said, God, I think it's true. I really, because I knew no preparation whatsoever. I had no idea about this. Yeah.
And what happened next?
Then I said, all right, I'll have that. I don't mind. And told my dad. I was very sad my mum had died years before, because she would have absolutely loved that. But my dad was dead pleased and everything. So, and then, you go along to the palace, and I got William, which was great. I'm a big fan of William, and the whole business. And you get trained how to kneel down in front of him, because he's got his sword that he puts. You kneel down in front. He puts the sword on each shoulder, and then you stand up. And you've got a little thing to help you stand up again, because you don't want to ask him to help you up. You do not want to do that. So you get a little practice beforehand of bending down, and then you go in. But you're in with loads of other people. There's 100 people getting stuff.
Lovely. And this was for the work that you did in medicine, right? In that statistics.
Yeah, so contributions to largely medical statistics. I think a lot of it was because of the work I've done for public inquiries. So this is sort of official work for the Bristol Royal Infirmary inquiry into babies with hearts, which is I talk about in the art of statistics, with heart disease who died, and then the Shipman murder inquiries, and other sort of good works. That's what you tend to get stuff like this for, good works.
Congratulations and thanks so much, Sir David, for your time on this podcast. And the last one, you talked a bit about your parents. If I were to ask you, what is one thing that has stayed with you, a principle, moral value that they taught you when you were a kid growing up until today? What is one thing that stands out that it has stayed with you until now?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's sort of positivity. I have reflected a bit on this. They were extraordinarily positive people. They never ever complained, and they never ever spoke ill of anybody, as far as I know, which I thought that was a pretty good lesson. So there was no moaning and complaining. They weren't very emotionally demonstrative. So there's lots of stuff. They were quite quiet. They're quite reserved. And so, although they actually were quite outside the family, they were quite exuberant and everything. But in the family, they were just sort of solidly working away. And so they were great. So I think that's a pretty good lesson I got. Maybe also to work. Anyway, no, yeah, that's good question. But I think that's what I took away. I would take away. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sir David, for your time on this podcast and for sparing more than what we had agreed for at the time.
No, real pleasure. Lovely. I love gossiping on about this stuff.
Lovely.